So thank you very much for that land acknowledgement. Next, we have Sister Clare Carter of the New England Peace Pagoda. She is ordained as a nun, assuming her order's vows of healing the world of materialism and violence through the spiritual practices of chanting, prayer, and constructing peace pagodas and her pilgrimages. She has participated in multiple pilgrimages for peace and justice, both locally and internationally, to witness suffering and inspiring transformation. Sister Clare will be leading us in chant and a call to justice. Thank you.
Thank you. A chilling image, a sword over an indigenous man's head, the motto, "We seek peace by the sword, but peace only under liberty." This long-held seal and motto of Massachusetts tells us the truth of the foundation of Massachusetts and the foundation of this country. Until recently, it has served as a force that so many of us unwittingly went along with, a force to keep in place the right of violent colonization underpinned by the false notion of white supremacy and the supremacy of Western civilization over the indigenous civilization. The liberty spoken of was the liberty violently enforced by the settlers to do what they wished on these lands, which were nurtured in sacred relationship for over 10,000 years by the indigenous peoples. We have to say how grateful we are to our elected political representatives and our community activists who have taken up the cause to pass legislation which will create a commission involving indigenous people to make a new seal and a new motto. If we look at the history starting 400 years ago, we understand that the great sachem Massasoit Usamiquin did allow the travelers on the Mayflower to live. He saw families. He saw people weakened with hunger. With circumspection and spiritual authority granted by his people, Massasoit met with Mayflower representatives to reach a common understanding of mutual coexistence, a treaty of peace, of mutual benefit and protection. Massasoit was practicing the ancient and strong spiritual ways of his ancestors. The life of his people had been supported by these ways for more than 10,000 years. They were the ways of sacred relationship among people and within the wondrous web of life, and they were good and true. Although the fledgling relationship which began between the two cultures, indigenous and European, held originally some promise, the drive for land ownership and political dominance soon took over as hundreds and then thousands from England came to these shores. Quote, "Peace by the sword, and only under liberty." The sword was the guns that the people brought, and the imposition of political forms of brutal power artificially imposed. The liberty, again, was the false and lethal notion of privilege and superiority of Europeans. The history of colonization is a dreadful lesson in the consequence of greed, of militarism, and racism. The near total loss of lands and life, the near total loss of language, the near total shattering of tribal ways, the nightmare of colonization of what came to be called New England. Essentially the break between the two peoples really was about materialistic thinking and spiritually based civilization. It may seem that the materially based thinking has triumphed as we look around, but in truth, the spiritually based civilization is showing that it is the way of life itself. It has been held by indigenous people through the long nightmare at incalculable cost, but it is still the way of the indigenous peoples. The future we have to create together will be a spiritually based way of thinking and living, with all religions contributing the highest and truest teachings from their faith for the good of all. This 3-day walk has been initiated and organized by Interfaith Opportunities Network. The organizers and members of ION are to be deeply thanked for their visionary commitment, seeding a true understanding of this history and our common responsibility to work for transformation and healing. Built into their initiative is the path of repairing, of giving back, of reparation. We are so grateful to ION. On this walk, the churches and synagogues have welcomed us. They have embraced the purpose of this walk. It is helping to sow the seeds of deep change of consciousness in this region and beyond. Just as the colonization of New England set the patterns of colonization of Turtle Island, may our seemingly small-scale efforts help in a nationwide awakening to transform this long nightmare of colonization, of militarism, and of racism to a common future which cherishes all that is living as sacred. Nam